been doing a clapper. All right. Just trying to think where to start this one. We just got back from coffee and we've condemned, I think, everybody.
Most of the people around, apart from the dear little boy and girl.
There were some cute kids.
And nice parents.
And nice parents.
Who didn't object to our...
Nice parents, this is on trend today. Nice parents producing more than one child and attractive, and we need more attractive people to have children. I'm starting with that. Criteria for having kids. Physical looks. Number one.
Really?
Yep.
Possibly agree with that.
I knew you would. You are very shallow and superficial, in a very different way.
In a very deep way.
Exactly. You are surface level in a very deep way. And I feel the same. I feel the same. I'm surface level in a very deep way, which you can be if you think that that's impossible. You're wrong, and you're as stupid as the man who parked. What I can't understand about people. That's a genuine from Deb. Unbelievable.
Well, it is in the same category. You should explain what happened. But it's in the same category as people coming into an empty cinema and sitting right next to you. I don't get that.
But you also said, to set that one up, we were pretty much in an empty underground car park just before we were having coffee this morning. And a guy drives in and then he takes the weirdest, most awkward park where he's kind of like...
He had to maneuver to get it.
He had to maneuver to get it, and he was like blocked in. Like if you're first cab off the rank arriving in a new parking place, you get one that you're going to zoom out of, right?
Yeah.
And he parks behind somebody in one of those, you know what your father used to say to me when we were at a car park. You've got like the two. You've got the park you're entering, and then there's a park in front of you. And sometimes, gloriously, that one in front of you is vacant too. So you go straight through, and without having to reverse in, you're in a park that you can drive straight forward out of.
Yeah.
And he would call those throughs. So
did he really?
So when you'd pull in to one, he'd go, "Oh, we've got a throughie." And no, it was a throughie. And I still say that now. I'm like, oh, throughie? We can go through this one to the next one.
That is a glorious little anecdote of you and Pa.
Yeah, well, we had our moments. I mean, like, he was... Look, as you know, he and I spent a lot of time together in the car. In fact, that was kind of... I would say I've spent more time with him in a car than anywhere else. Truly. Yeah. I genuinely.
Of course. They add up all the school trips.
Yeah, because he would, in a very kind of fussy and controlling way, but also, there were moments of levity in it and fun times too. But he would constantly drive me to school, and like there was this sort of inability not to be driven to school, which became really tedious. I mean, like at first it was because. To set things up, you and I moved in with your parents after your divorce. Not very long after your divorce.
Yeah.
And I was 3 or 4 years old, and, it became this situation, as I think I said in the first episode, of like, it became this sort of compound, cult-like environment, and it started to sour. Initially, it was useful.
But then it was my parents leading the way, dominating the life. And you and I almost like the kids together.
Well, I think one of the big problems that you and I have had in terms of a mother-son dynamic is that that shifted when we moved in with your parents. You and I became like siblings, and you have been to me more like a big sister in a lot of ways than a mother, which has been confusing, and it hasn't been good for the relationship.
No, and it wasn't good for my growth beyond that event, because there was already a deference to whatever my father said or whatever he wanted to do in terms of deferring to him, or what do I do here? Well, that just compounded that.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, I can look back now and say there was a lot of inner frustration about that very point, but I could never articulate it, and maybe I couldn't see it as clearly as I do now when I look back.
Well, I mean, no, you go.
No, well, it was all done in the name of support. Fantastic. But then it became something else.
Yeah, support. Your parents' idea of support is very all-encompassing, which is a polite way of saying very controlling. But you know, but look, like, I'm sure we'll get more into sort of that stuff later. It's kind of interesting. I mean, like, because at this point in the stage that we're at with the book and trying to flesh out the first chapters and find a starting point with your memoir, it's, you know, trying to process the child Deborah is an interesting one for me, because you have said in the past that, you know, you sort of put out there this kind of like idealistic upbringing, like it was rural, and it was, to some extent, by implication, you suggested that it was quite free, and like there's images, sort of iconography in family law at this point that you have given me, which is like, the famous one is playing Annie Oakley on the dam banks.
Yeah, well, yes, I hold that up as one of the great moments of my childhood, because Dad was teaching at a rural school. Yeah. We were living in the house that went, the education department house that went with that job. Mm-hmm. And so I had the whole grounds, the whole house garden, and the whole school to myself. Yeah. And I think about that as being glorious, and riding my bike. The bike was the horse, and I'm in my Annie Oakley. I'm in my cowboy costume, and the dog's with me. Yeah. But the more I think about that, as we've been trying to get, you know, a memoir together, it was very isolating. So, you know, even climbing the trees in an empty schoolyard at the weekend, it's always me on my own. Mm. It's me on my own in the sleep out, which was made into a room for my doll's furniture.
Like a playroom.
Playroom, yeah. And it was me spending many hours on the swing.
In the schoolyard?
No, I had my own swing in the house yard.
So you're just there swinging back and forth for hours?
Yeah, and lost in my pretend world, dress-up world, too. Yeah.
Well, I mean, sort of to set the picture, your father, my grandfather, was the principal at various rural schools around...
The head teacher.
The head teacher at various rural schools around Victoria, country Victoria. And like, that was you know, a tiny little outback school, which featured usually a schoolhouse with a single, like, it was essentially one big room, right? Like, that's what they looked like. And it was, you know, grades prep to six. Yeah. And
depending on the numbers, sometimes if the numbers were high, you would have an infant teacher who was called the sewing mistress.
The sewing mistress, okay.
Now, you know, that could be my memory failing, but that's what you had. That person was obviously a trained teacher, would have to be.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
And then when the numbers weren't big, of course, the headmaster was the teacher for the whole school.
Yeah, and like in terms of numbers, you're talking like 10 or 15 people spread across prep to 6, up to 20, 25.
Up to 24.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah. So it's not many kids, and it's basically a school designed to meet the educational needs of a district, right?
Yes.
And so this is like early kind of education. You know, I mean, these schools don't exist anymore.
No.
And I find them fascinating because, like, I find, you know, thinking about books and literature and storytelling, like schools, particularly sort of boarding schools, private schools, schools that are, you know, in the middle of nowhere, or Catholic schools, they all have, you know, we talked in the first episode about narrative. They all have their narratives baked in. Yeah. And to me, you know, the bush is kind of a haunted place. And when I think of the bush and I think of a schoolhouse, a rural schoolhouse, I get like a bit of a chill. Like, it's a little haunted. It's a little empty. It evokes to me isolation. And when you tell me these stories of your upbringing and your childhood being, you know, one of a class of 15 in a little district with your father as the head teacher, you know, it evokes to me isolation and loneliness, particularly when coupled with how you spent your time, you know, your playtime, which is completely in your own head, and it's a sort of just passing time. It's fantasy. It's, you know, like, I see now the person that you are and your attitudes towards certain things as fully evolving out of those experiences, that who you are is absolutely baked in to that upbringing.
Yeah, I mean, I even still today talk about not being part of the world, like the world's outside. Well, you know, outside the glass. That's right. That derives from there. Like, I'm in my own little world with no one else, right from a little girl.
Yeah. And life is something that you say happens on the other side of the glass. Like, it's something that other, like, there's always other people, other families, because this is also everything we're talking about here is also related to what I think is like the core dysfunction of or the core sort of brutality, or another word for it is the intensity of small families.
Yes.
Like the other part that has to be gotten across is the fact that, you know, you are, yes, your father did have some, like, there is extended family, but, well, that's a whole thing to get into. Yeah. But my point that I was going to make is that you're an only child, right? And so it's just you and your parents. And then I guess I struggle, like, working with you, listening to you, reading diary entries, reading excerpts of your work. Like, I have trouble separating small family from only child, from you as an individual, from everything I know and that I've experienced. Like, I don't know.
Well, again, there's so many layers there. It's not just an only child in growing up in a town. Yeah. It's an only child growing up in an isolated experience. It's also, let's face it, my mother's an only child as well.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing I was
and
going to
then
say.
I'm an only child, and then I only have one child. So there's this almost glorification of oh well, again, the narrative, that's what we do.
That we're kind of like pro only children. See, that's something else that I can't,
Yeah, and going back to that, like my memory is I always paint that childhood as being glorious.
That's what, that's what's so confusing,
Yeah. And yet now I can see that actually is the basis of how I've evolved as a person.
Well, when we started this, and like this has been a real point of confusion for me, because you have always projected, or I don't know, we talked about delusion in the first episode, and I really think that you, not deluded, but that there is some delusion. Like you have always projected this idealism of a country upbringing, and all I see is isolation and loneliness, and really just this kind of haunted unhappiness. And I'm not saying that there weren't good moments. There were.
So really, in effect, I've sold the narrative as well.
Well, I think isn't that how we've ended up here?
Yes.
Is that it's been generations of people selling a narrative. Yeah,
and never examining it. There's aspects of our life, and we'll talk about things as we go along, that have been glorified. They are our narratives.
Mm-hmm.
And when you re-examine them, they all speak to the kind of people we are now.
Well, in the simplest terms, it's narratives that haven't served anyone, or they stop serving people after. See, that's another thing, is that, like, I think some of these narratives that we have about who we are as a family.
Yes.
I believe that if you look at the generations and you look at, the story that's evolved over time, and I would go back 4 generations. I would go back to your grandparents, right? Like,
yes.
I think some of these narratives begin there.
Yes.
And I think that those narratives serve the family at a point in time, at a point in history where you have less and you need something to cling on to.
Yes.
But as the family grows through time itself, the narratives stop serving because the culture's changed and the society around us has changed. And so suddenly these kind of, work ethic and will triumph over all, and you've just got to persevere, all that stuff. Because the other thing too here is that there's a class thing. This is an impoverished mindset as well.
Absolutely.
You need to tell yourself these things when it's hard to put dinner on the table. But like by the time it's the 1980s, 1990s, and there's, things are more readily available, then suddenly that kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a when things are really stripped down, that kind of bare essential living stuff. It just starts to look awkward. It's like, well, people don't live that way anymore. People don't have that mindset.
So what you're saying is our family then got stuck in those same stories when they were striving to do better and achieve more things.
Absolutely, because like from a class perspective, it's like certainly by the time I'm around, we're sort of like lower middle class into middle class properly.
Yes.
But your mother is still putting all her change in jars and counting it up and being really frugal, and there's good aspects to that, but it's sort of like their mentality didn't evolve with the time.
Oh, no.
And
yeah, I can see that.
And then it's kind of, it doesn't really.
It's no longer fit for purpose.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't
match. Actually, it doesn't match how they end up living. But then, you know, they haven't got the mindset to have grown with that.
Yeah, I mean, funny anecdotes include your grandmother, your mum's mum, who, like, she was one of, I think, 9.
Yeah.
And super, well, just poor, like absolutely dirt poor. And, you know, like, some of my fondest memories are like the fact that her mentality never changed. So she's 90 living in a nursing home and she's nicking cigarettes from the nurses and getting into all sorts of trouble. And the other thing that she was doing was, there was a point where she was living on this property and the police came because she kept going to the supermarket and changing the price tags on items. So she'd get the cheap price tag from the biscuits and put it on, like, the, you know, the cut of beef or whatever, and she'd like check out, and unless somebody serving was really onto it.
See, I don't know the full extent of it. I thought that only happened once, but maybe
that happened. That happened a bunch of times. Like, she came back in the police car a few times. I'm certain of it, because like the way it's talked about, because that's the other thing.
Well,
too,
again, things don't get talked about clearly.
No.
And that's why, I mean, I'm not disputing that story, but I only see it as a one-off thing.
But your mother was so, it can't have been a one-off thing, because your mother was so distraught and embarrassed by her mother, and so like so edgy and cagey whenever Nan, your grandmother, was around, because it was like, oh, what's she gonna do? Like,
there was always that, and see, I can say that now. Oh yeah. There were always eggshells around that, particularly around that relationship, because my
well, that relationship is one of several mother-daughter ones that are just absolutely fucked up.
Yeah. So maybe I was protected a lot from all that.
Perhaps, yeah. But I want to go back. Like, let's not get too in the weeds with all that. Let's go back to, because obviously, one of the hardest things with the memoir has been actually finding a starting point, right? Because I was like, you know, you don't want it to be this boring year by year thing, right? But at the same time, I'm like, maybe we could utilize one of these idolized stories that you've got and sort of
unpick that.
Yeah, just show it for what it is. Because so one of the ones you gave me, and I think we've set in stone now that that's going to be where things begin, but you have yourself waking up as a, I don't know, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, something like that, like a little girl,
a tiny girl,
and you get up in the workers' cottage that your family was assigned through the education department.
You were, in that instance, we're just renting in the district.
Don't ruin this with detail.
No. Sorry.
Don't ruin the podcast with the bullshit details. Like, you've destroyed my life enough already with trying to write this book. But you get up, you go out, you go to the chicken coop, you get an egg, and you come in and you crack it into a pan, which you haven't turned on because you don't know how to cook. But it's all about sort of proving something. It seems to me to be about like trying to show your parents that you're competent or capable. That's what I took from it.
Well, it is, because when I was collecting eggs with my mother, I always seemed to drop one. So
that's right. Yeah.
I'm always in trouble. Now, when I say I'm always in trouble, I you know, I don't remember the ins and outs of that, but yeah, sure. So I'm desperate to go and pick one up without dropping one.
Yeah, you're right. I'm 4 years old when I decided to try my hand at cooking. I've watched my mother so many times in the kitchen, and now I want to show her what I've learned. It's early when I wake up, daylight just beginning to break through, and icy in the house because nobody has been up yet to light the fires. And I'm sort of like, but why does this 4-year-old, 5-year-old need to prove or disprove anything? I find that so strange. You're right.
Well, again, Toby, that is proving your point. Now, I do have memory of that. Whether it's because you've talked about it, you know, is it a real memory? I feel like I'm there.
You go on to say.
And then, if you examine it now, it's leading back to what you're saying. What's the dynamic in the household that leads a little girl to try and prove herself?
Because you go on to write, whenever I collect eggs with my mother, I manage to drop one, but I've promised myself I won't this morning as I leave our weatherboard dwelling and step out into the frost and dew. It is so cold that everything comes to me in tones of steely grey and green. I step off the porch and walk down the path, passing under the clothesline between the back of the house and the chicken coop. And then it goes on, you know, I open the creaky door, you go into the nest, you take one, I put the egg inside my dressing gown pocket, where it can't be dropped, and transport it back into the house. Reach for a small black frying pan. I take the pan, put it atop the stove, believing this first foray, you're right, first foray into the culinary world will be a grand success. Like, it's, again, talk about delusion.
Yeah.
Just like I've seen my mother do, I crack the egg into the pan and season it liberally with salt and pepper, and then I wait. It's not long because my clatter in the kitchen has stirred them before my parents are standing in the kitchen too. They're watching me, and we're all waiting for something to happen. And that's kind of like, I think that that's a good way to start or end at least the first chapter of the memoir.
Yeah.
Because there seems to be this ongoing theme of waiting between you and your parents, and I mean that not about the book, I mean that about life. Like, I always saw you as almost like waiting for your parents to act or not act, or waiting for your relationship with them not to end but maybe to evolve. I don't know, but before we go on with any of that, what I wanted to bring this back to, and what I sort of intended to talk about, I guess, to some extent, was like, is this all just, we use the word delusion, is this all just the delusion or the warped perspective of only children?
Well, possibly. See, as an only child, you don't know of other. You don't know any other way. Like, what you're saying is inbuilt in that situation is isolation. It's yeah, the parents are going to be commenting, not the brother or the sister. There's no one else around.
I cannot escape the only childness of the entire, of all of it, because, and this needs to be made clear to anyone who's listening, we're not talking about one only child. We're talking about Mum's mum, my grandmother, was an only child. Mum was an only child. My father was an only child.
How did I forget him?
How did you forget?
How did I forget him in this?
And I am an only child.
I know. It's unreal.
And what was always so confusing to me is, as an only child, I was like, I would never have an only child. And yet, I had seen 3 people, your mother, you, your husband, ex-husband, what do we call him?
Oh.
The idiot. What do we call him? The jester or something. Anyway, that doesn't matter. But he, like those 3 people, my 2 biological parents, my maternal grandmother, how could those 3 people want an only child. I was absolutely miffed by that growing up because I knew in my bones that I would either have no children or I would have 5. There's no way I'm having one.
That is so interesting that you say that, because, and I used to quote this, I used to quote a whole lot of, cliches. That is the cliche. An only child, because of their experience, and I don't know what the stats are on this.
And that would be really interesting to find out. That would be really
interesting. But by
the way, if you're an only child listening to this, please comment.
Yeah. The general thinking was that because it wasn't considered right, in inverted commas, to have an only child.
Yeah, it's always been culturally, frowned upon in a way, or it's
discussed. Yeah. And the general consensus was, if you're an only child, you would be somehow affected by that, and you would go on to have more children. Now, again, statistics, I don't know whether that happens. Whereas I used to love flying the flag so naively. Oh, my mother's an only child, I'm an only child, I only had one child. Isn't this grand? And I flew that flag for many, many years. So was that to justify, or again, it wasn't thought about?
Mm.
Now, like I'm looking back about a lot of things, there is no way I would have an only child.
Yeah, if you could do it over, right? Yeah, I mean, look, before anybody becomes irate or offended and starts talking about, well, I could only have one and blah, blah, blah. Fine. There are circumstances, of course, but I'm talking from an emotional perspective, and I'm talking about something based on lived experience. I certainly, there are aspects to my only childhood that I really did like. I do think you become more imaginative. Who knows whether that's a good thing, though. Truly, is that such a good thing?
That's right.
Because that's the thing. Oh, wow, you get to be so imaginative and da-da-da. It's like, yeah, you get to be like a little psychopath.
Because you're isolated.
Because you're fucking lonely.
Yeah.
Actually, I do mean to offend people.
Do you?
I take it back. I do mean to. If you're sitting there and you're sort of on the fence, is this person? Yeah, I am taking a big jab at you.
No, but
go to the corner and do some deep breathing.
But you also had to defend yourself as an only child. Oh, you must be so spoiled. Oh, you've got everything. Oh, and so a lot of my cliche waving the flag. Hey, no, I'm okay.
So on that, and that's kind of what I would say too, is that I think it's a defensive stance, because one of the interesting things about being an only child, and one of the reasons that I think it's kind of a tough thing to do to a kid, is to make him an only, or her an only child, or they an only child. Don't comment on that. That's just a gag. Relax, everybody. The point that the point that I was going to make is that it's interesting. You have to defend yourself. There's so many we talk about narratives a lot on this show, and there are cultural, social narratives created around only children. Mm-hmm. They're selfish, they're weird, they're lonely, but also that they are spoiled. That's the big one, right? And materially, and what's so interesting about that, first of all, it always amazes me how many cultural narratives and cultural norms we have that are entirely middle class. Yeah, you are materially spoiled as an only child because there's only you, but not if you're poor.
No.
If you're poor, you're not
They're
spoiled.
still poor.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah,
it always comes
yeah,
from this
that's
middle class
so true.
bullshit perspective.
Yeah.
But like, I always felt that like I already felt awkward and not lonely necessarily, but isolated, and wanting like, what's it like to have a sibling? What's that like? So I already felt a bit wrong-footed. But then you're getting condemned, not by just children around you, by other parents are condemning you.
Yes, absolutely.
Like you go to parties and parents will say, oh, well, Tommy's not going to get as many presents as you probably do, blah, blah, blah. And you're sort of like, what the fuck? Like everybody hates me. Yeah. And it's like, I already feel awkward and isolated, and now I'm getting this vibe, this sense from everybody that I'm kind of disliked and that I'm wrong, like I'm wrong.
You just said an interesting point though about isolation and loneliness. Like, if you are isolated, do you have to be lonely?
Not necessarily.
No.
I mean, you used to say that you felt alone, not lonely. And I understand that fully.
Yeah, So again, when I'm on the swing as a little girl and missing out on swimming lessons because I've pretended that I'm ill or something, and the whole school's gone off to swimming, and I'm on the swing, I'm not lonely.
No, you're not necessarily lonely. That's a good clarification. But what is the compounded effect of that aloneness?
Sure.
Over time? Okay, it may not be loneliness in the moment, but the fact that you're someone, maybe the only one, having those experiences consistently will in time set you apart in a more definite and permanent way, I believe.
Well, it has, because fast forward to now, my friendships are one-on-one friendships. I don't do big groups.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
I'm very uncomfortable in a group. Certainly, I think that's a hangover. And that's but there are, so I was thinking about this recently because I'm thinking I wouldn't mind writing an article about this, because given the cost of living crisis and all what's happened and happening, continuing to happen, and including environmental problems that we're having, I do think it will become attractive to prospective parents to have only children.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like there is a logic to it in the era that we're going through.
Yeah.
And I suppose my message would be, for God's sake, don't do that, because I'm scared of a future of only children. I mean, like, we already have the terrible mental health effects of social media and this digitized era that we're living in. People already feel awkward and isolated enough.
Yes.
Like, I think creating, a society of smaller and smaller families it's not a good thing, or at the very least, see, I also am a believer that most things can be overcome. So what I would say, and I guess an addendum to that, is that, okay, if you are going to have a smaller family, or if we as a society are going in the direction of smaller families, well, what are we going to do to sort of compensate for that, or to sort of counterbalance the effects of that?
Yeah, because one of the effects of that, and I think that's in my case, it produces another kind of relationship with the parents.
Yeah, absolutely it does.
Because the parents, not only the parents, they are your friends, they are your playmates, and that can go right to adulthood.
Yeah, because you spend so much time with them in childhood. Yeah,
and you really have zero, I'm going to say very little, but zero understanding of people and their relationship with their siblings.
I guess
I don't.
I have no understanding what that's like. I envy it.
No.
I always think about having siblings that I don't have.
But see, that's interesting. You said you did. I never wanted, and that's not just a myth of my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
I never sought it.
Yeah. No, I always wanted an older sister or a younger brother or something. I always wanted that. Always. Because so the two ethical considerations with only children are these, right? Like, you might enjoy a few extra Christmas presents, right, as an only child. But over 40, you become an only caregiver to your only parents. You know, and look, no sibling relationships. I do not idolize sibling relationships. I want to make that clear, because those can be really bad. And I have seen families fall apart when all the siblings are approaching 60 and one is doing more of the caregiving. One hasn't had children, and so the one who has, or the two who have, want a bigger share of the inheritance because of the decisions you've made. I've seen families fall apart. I have no silly deluded belief that a sibling relationship is going to be this great thing forever. I don't mean it that way. However, those feelings of isolation and aloneness that you have through your upbringing only are compounded later in life, especially if you haven't created a large network for yourself. And I do think that only children are positioned to incline themselves to a more isolated life because it's what they knew. So like I think that I don't know any statistics on this, and I'd love to hear from people. Like, are you an only child who went out and had a huge family, or are you an only child who's still alone? Like, because I honestly believe you're more likely to be either of those. I don't know whether you're more likely to be like slap bang in the middle.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And so
you're either reacted to the situation and had
and the counterpoint, the other part to that I just wanted to finish on, in terms of like ethics and having an only child, is that like, you're an only child, you're also the only child who will absorb absolutely everything in a circumstance that is less than perfect. By which I mean that the fact of being an only child means that in acrimonious divorce situations and so on, you are the only child at the coalface of that raging experience and fire. And like, I understand, people get divorced and whatever, and those things can be good and sure, but everything you experience is as one individual. And so, whether you're talking about economic worries, whether you're talking about a parent with really bad health problems late in life, whether you're talking about a divorce, as an only child, you are the only child experiencing that directly.
Absolutely.
And that is my concern, because it can be so fucking damaging.
And there's no one on the ground to just even to talk through things, and then compound that with the only child who, as you say, hasn't. I mean, there can be only children who have made a life for themselves, which does include a whole lot of people. Some of us haven't done that.
Well,
I certainly haven't.
When we started to sort of repair our relationship, it was like a sibling. As I've said before, we had this sibling dynamic as a result of our circumstances. But what we started to do was a process of what I believe would have happened had I had a sibling forever ago, which was to cross-check our experiences with one another.
Yes.
And that is the thing that I most loathed about my upbringing, was that there was never a brother or a sister to turn around and go, do you think that was weird? Like, do you remember when Mum said this, or do you remember when Dad did this? And they would either say yes or no, right? And that can be really bolstering.
And and having that conversation, you might dismiss it.
Yeah.
But you and I, in our circumstances,
I hung on to it
just kept absorbing it.
Yes.
So you're doubling down on, well, and you're attuned to things, and you're thinking, is this right?
Yes.
And so, you know, that leads to a lack of confidence and how to approach the world. In my case, I'm just absorbing it. Oh, yeah, well, this is how it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Until now, when I look back and can unpick things.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, most of these things could be counted. If I'd been sent off to therapy as a little kid, maybe I could cross-check with a counsellor.
Yes.
If both my parents weren't only children, maybe I would have had cousins, aunts, and uncles I could have talked to. Like, my stuff is very rare because it's not only child, it's
no
3 generations of only children,
Yeah.
and cut off from any extended family and any like this is an extreme scenario, right?
Yes.
That we're talking out of, right?
Yes.
But I also think so much of what we're saying is relatable to everybody, like on some level, or not, you know. But yeah, like it was that I never got to cross-check a single thing, and because you were actually my mum as a kid, I you know, we didn't have an open relationship where we just talked about stuff. We just didn't. So I wasn't doing that cross-checking with you as a child and as a teenager. It's only been since coming home after 30 that I've been able to go to you and go, hey, do you remember when this? Do you remember that time that did so-and-so really say that? And
that's been incredibly isolating for you.
Yeah.
But it also speaks to the point that I was making earlier. When we have unpicked things, we are actually on the same page, which underlines what I was saying before. I think there was a lot of inner frustration in me, but I just wasn't articulating it. You know, these things are weird. Oh, but you know, that's just what it is. So it's interesting when we've started this process of unpicking, we're agreeing.
Yes. But that's also so frustrating because
it's sad. It's you know, wasted time.
Yeah. There's been so much wasted time.
Yeah, sure.
That experience of isolation does really undermine you because you don't have the confidence to speak up to those things. You're sort of like because you're left in your own little world of indecision and worry. You know, you go, I don't know, maybe that seems off, but and you just try and do it. You try and nut it out for yourself, which always results.
Well, you push it down, you repress. Yeah. You know, here we go again. That word.
Yeah, absolutely. That might be a stopping point. I'm just gonna check the time on that. 48 minutes.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought it was. Actually.
Close to an hour. That's it. That's the end of episode 2, which I think we're going to title The Future Cannot Be More Only Children, because that's sure to offend.
Absolutely.
All right. Anything else you wanted to add to this one?
No.
All right. Let's leave it there. Didn't even get to the Faraday stuff. It's amazing. We can just keep doing this and just get it out, like, because I think we can record.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say something then. You know, when we were talking about schools, but it doesn't matter.